Welcome to Nitty Gritty Real Estate. In this series, we're interviewing Matthew Cox. He's infamous for committing millions of dollars in mortgage fraud, for which he served 12 years in prison. He has an ugly past, no doubt, but we're looking beyond that to learn from his unique perspective in the industry so that we can become better real estate investors. Let's get into it.
You know what a farming scam is? A farming scam is exactly what I did in Ybor City in Tampa, where I went in and I bought, it's very close to a pump and dump scheme, sort of. Only I legitimately, it's not just a bunch of guys saying the stock's gonna go up. This is, it's verifiable, so it's much more secure for the person doing it. So what's happening is I would go into an area, and I would buy up a bunch of cheap houses in an area, $40,000, $50,000 for a house. I would then go downtown and I would record the sales of those properties for $200,000, $250,000, $300,000.
Yeah, I've read about that in your book, yeah.
Right. So what happens is now if I go buy a piece of property for $50,000 and I call an appraiser and say, hey, I need you, I go to the Bank of America and I say, hey, I want to borrow money on this property I just bought. They say, well, we're going to send our appraiser out. They send their appraiser out. Their appraiser comes and looks at the property and goes, well, this is something else. He said, this property, it's not a great property. It's a bad neighborhood. But boy, the comparables are everywhere. Like, the comparables are literally, there's a house across the street sold for $190,000. That house over there sold for $220,000. That one over there sold for $179,000. They're like, well, your house is probably worth $180,000. I'm like, okay, great. They're like, yeah, it's funny because like a year ago, these houses were selling for like $40,000. I go, oh, okay. What I did was it's called a farming scam because you've inflated the entire area. You've grown the area, the value of the area artificially. And so what happens is now I have the ability to buy a property for $40,000 and borrow $180,000 or $190,000 on a piece of property that I borrowed for $40,000. So I can easily pull out $150,000, make a couple payments, and just take off, which is what I did.
It seems like kind of an advanced scam, because you have to have the capacity to pump all the values up.
Right. But it's a real estate. It's not a real estate scam that happens a lot, but it's definitely a real estate. But it's a real estate scam. It is one that when it does happen, there were a bunch of lawyers that actually did this in Dade County, and they had bought it was an outrageous amount of houses in this one little shithole area, and they did like 30 houses. They were buying them for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and they just out in this little, the city, or people will go and they'll build these cheap houses, and the community does okay for a while, and then it just goes to shit, and then you've got all these houses that are little 3-bedroom, 1-bath houses that are concrete block that you can pick up for $50,000, and then they set up one of the houses. They did a poor job of renovating the houses. It just, what is it?
Lipstick on a pig.
Yeah. So, and then they ran a bunch of ads, and the ads said that, hey, we're giving people their down payment, down payment assistance programs, we're holding second mortgages, they're doing all kinds of stuff to help you get in these houses. But they were selling the houses for outrageous prices, $150,000, $200,000. People are coming in saying, this house is ridiculous. They're like, yeah, we're renovating the whole neighborhood's coming up, it's an up and coming area, blah blah blah, and we'll give you your down payment, or we'll give you a gift for your down payment, and we'll hold a second mortgage, so you can buy a $160,000, $180,000 house. You're just going to get a loan from the bank for $130,000. We'll hold the paper for the rest of it. Well, of course, those people are not going to pay them back. They're not going to make they don't expect to get the money back. What happens is, so these guys are buying the houses for $40,000, putting $10,000 in, they got $50,000 in the average house. They get these people to borrow $120,000 or $130,000. They just made $70,000, $80,000. So I don't care if you pay me the extra $30,000 you owe me or not. And then these people make a few payments to the bank. They're still paying above average, but basically they're paying a little bit more than they were paying for rent anyway. But they make a few payments, things start going wrong with the properties, whatever the case may be. They never should have qualified for the house to begin with. And the whole place starts going under, and each house starts going under, left and right, left and right, left and right. And it's a farming scam. They had artificially created this market that just didn't exist. And it's something common that developers do also. Developers will go in. You ever wonder how some developer will go buy a huge plot of land and put in all these streets?
Yeah.
And then, so now when people go in to buy the house for $300,000, I'm willing to pay $300,000. I don't have $300,000. I got to go to the bank. So then they go to the bank, and the bank sends out an appraiser, and the appraiser says, well, there's no comparable sales. There's nothing but trailer parks around here. The house is amazing, but there's no comparable sales. Mm-hmm. So what developers do is they go in, they build 3 or 4 spec houses, right? And then they sell those homes to people they know to record the value of those homes, or the values, to record the sales prices. Now, when they turn around, and that buyer wants to buy a house and he goes to Bank of America will lend him the money. Why? Because there are sales that provide $350,000.
Even though they're full of the developers'
Absolutely.
families and friends. What's weird about
Right.
this is like there's this gray area. Like
Yeah.
there's the guy he's out there intentionally to
Yeah.
scam. Now there's developer guys like
He's not.
This is like strategy, but he's still pumping the numbers by
Right.
selling these things to his family.
But what
and
choice?
friends.
But what choice does he have? And here's the
Yeah.
great thing about it is, it is only illegal. This is what the FBI told me. They said it's not illegal to record the value of a house at a higher price. Mm-hmm. It's not illegal for me to say, what's the value of this home? You bought this home, what's the value? Because that's what you're paying your taxes for, the value of the home. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the house is worth $200,000. I picked it up for $40,000, but I think it's worth $200,000. I'm going to record it at $200,000. Have you committed a fraud? No. You've only committed a fraud if it's in furtherance of a scheme. So now I've done 4 of them, still haven't broken the law, but when I go to the bank and I have the bank use those as comparables, and I know I'm doing it to borrow money that I'm never going to pay back, or to borrow money on a house that I know isn't worth it, now you've committed fraud. So now when you did all these things, that was fraudulent. Why? Because you did it in furtherance of a scheme. So anyway, that's a farming scam, is essentially artificially inflating an area for the purposes of borrowing more money than those properties independently would have been valued at. You've artificially farmed the area. You've grown the value of the area artificially. And of course, it's, in my particular case, I borrowed $15 million on artificially inflated houses that were probably only worth a few million. The total of those houses were probably worth $2 or $3 million, and I borrowed $15 million on houses that were at most combined that were maybe $3 million, maybe $4. So yeah, it's absolutely bank fraud. Then you have all these charges that overlap. You got bank fraud, you got wire fraud, you got conspiracy to commit fraud. You get suddenly they just start money laundering. All these frauds that can.
And it's all related to the same
thing.
Same scheme.
And Matt, can you also discuss? You mentioned this several times in your books about when you go down to the county office, you pay extra. Was it $7 per 10,000 to get the extra stamps to increase the
right.
value of the home?
That's how you record. That's how you're recording the value of those homes.
Can you please explain that process?
Because if I'm buying a property, if it's to pay extra doc stamps is okay. You pay doc stamps on the sale of the property. So if I buy a piece of property for $100,000, you pay $700 in doc stamps to record that deed. So the value of that home is worth $100,000. I'm paying $700 to record it. So if I buy a house for $50,000, I pay $350 in doc stamps. So you go downtown to record it. Typically the title person does it, but if you do it yourself, or if you ask the title person to let you bring it down, most likely they will. So you can go down and you say, hey, look, I'm recording this. I bought it for $50,000. It's $350. And they go, okay. You go, here's the thing though. That house is worth worth $150,000. And they go, okay, well, if I put down $150 on the form, then you have to pay an extra $700 in doc stamps. And you go, that's what I want to do. And they go, well, the sale will show up at $150,000. And you go, well, that's what I want to do. So they go, okay. So it's $350 for the $50,000 and $700 for the extra $100,000. So now you've got it's $1,050 and I have a sale that shows up for $150 that really was for $50. And so what happens is that goes into public records. So you've got one for $150. If you do one across the street, you buy that house for $40. You should have paid around $300. You pay an extra $700 and change. That one shows up for $150 or $140. And if you do another one down the street, that one sells for $180. Looks like you bought it for $60. Looks like it's for $180. And you do another house. Next thing you know, when you go to borrow money against other houses or those houses, the appraiser is going to come out and say, the comps are everywhere. There's a house there, there's a house there, there's a house there. They're all going for 160, 170. Your house is worth 170, but the truth is it's worth about 40 or 50. So
what would keep the appraiser? Is it not kind of a red flag when they say you got this comp and this comp and this comp? Do they know that you paid extra for that special stamp? And it's like, this one could be artificially inflated.
No idea.
There's no way they would know.
No way.
Huh.
I was in Nashville one time and I went and I bought a bunch of houses. Actually went into Nashville in an area where the average house, the median house in this area, it's called J.C. Napier, was selling for probably 50 grand, 40 or 50 grand. Mm-hmm. And I go in and I buy a bunch of properties, bought them for 65,000 because the guy was willing to owner finance them to me. So I buy these 3 houses and I bought another. I ended up buying 4 houses. And I specifically bought the houses to farm the area. So I bought these houses for about 60,000 a piece. And when I went to the closing, I said, look, I'm going to buy them for 65 a piece. He's going to owner finance them to me. But I need you to, I'm going to record the sale, the value of these houses at 180 and 210 and 190. And he was like, okay, well, you got to pay the extra dock stamps. I said, no problem. So I paid the extra dock stamps. And then I bought another house for like under 20 grand. I think I bought it for maybe 20. And I told the woman, we're going to record the sale of this property at 150 or 160, and I'll pay the extra dock stamp. She said she didn't have a problem with that. And so I did that. Well, then the houses had been rehabbed, but they were just horrible rehabs. So the appraiser comes out. He gave me an appraisal for like 180,000. I went to the bank. The bank lent me 130, 140 grand on a house I bought that I basically had $3,500 into the house. I put $3,500 down. I borrowed $140,000.
And Matt, would you say you had 4 or 5 homes within half a mile of each other? Would you put all the homes under the same LLC, or did each home have a different homeowner?
Well, no,
a different name.
And this was a scam, so I'm not concerned about LLCs. It's a scam. So
I meant to say, would a different entity own each home?
No,
they're just all
they're all owned by fake people.
Yeah.
In this particular thing, but that's why the whole thing is that would be another video. Like if we're just focusing on what a farming scam is, because you could do this individually. You could just buy a house in your name. You could buy a house. He could buy a house.
But no, I thought you mentioned one time on a previous video that with the reservoir dogs, you had a different person. It appeared that a different person owned each home, so then it made it look like the appraisals were better.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you were to do this with a group of people, you would buy one house. He would buy one house. Yeah. I would buy. You said LLC.
Sorry.
Please stop helping. You would buy he would buy a house, he'd buy a house, because if it's all the same house, the appraiser is going to look and see, hey, the same person owns all 4 houses. So, but I'm not trying to tell someone how to do this, how to pull it off.
Yeah.
So the point is that you're creating these fake comparables,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Farming.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Fake comparable sales, which drives up the value of the area, which allows you to have this huge borrowing capacity.
I think we're good on that one, right?
Yep.
Okay. It's cool. Do you feel good about that?
I'm good.